Jefferies analyst Julien Dumoulin-Smith brings some utility stocks he loves as well to set. Julien, great to have you on set. It's not for everybody, but this idea that data centers are going to raise costs is not true. It sounds like they're going to raise earnings, though.
Oh, you better believe it. They are certainly going to raise earnings. I mean, look, they're not your father's utilities, right? Let's be honest to ourselves. I mean, the backdrop here is we're looking at the longest run in earnings growth at the highest level we've almost ever seen in the sector's history, right? This kind of follows with the idea that, yes, naturally sales growth and volumetric growth of utility sales is rising. So indeed, the earnings are. But I think to your point, I think it's really quite accurate. It depends on where you are and who you're asking in terms of whose bills are actually rising. I think the new paradigm, and I think the realities of the tech industry is cognizant of what's going on here. They need to step up. There's a social contract that they understand. And frankly, I think the paradigm that we're looking at here is utilities are going to make it possible where hyperscalers step up and actually reduce consumers' bills. I mean, it might be...
So that's not getting a lot of attention as well, but you look like in northern Pennsylvania, Nisource, I think NI, the ticker, a company you like. They're going to be paying a ton or being paid a ton for energy by Amazon. That's not, the consumers aren't covering that, are they?
Look, I mean, that's what's so fascinating about what we're seeing. So this company, one of their utilities in northern Indiana, just announced a contract where literally over a course of a decade, they're going to give $1 billion back to consumers. I mean, honestly, that's pretty remarkable, right? When you think about a lot of the narrative out there saying, hey, we're about to jack your utility bill, and here we are with a novel contract, the latest large-scale data center contract to date. Is this going to become...
Well, who's paying that billion, though? Is that the data center providers?
Yeah.
They're paying Nisource. Nisource is refunding some of that to the consumer.
Exactly. And I think this is something that's going to be copied, right? You're going to see this. They need to change the narrative, and they're going to use this as an opportunity to drive, frankly, the paradigm in other states. And look, it's not as if this isn't without earnings. Nisource is one of our favorite stocks out there, in as much as, look, they're almost going to double earnings in less than a decade, right? By 2033, we're talking about almost $4 in earnings. And look, that's just getting started as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I tried to pin down one of the CEOs, Nextera, on how much Google's paying, and he's going to keep that close to the vest. I get it. But there have been reports that Microsoft will pay Constellation about $130 to $140 per megawatt hour. To put that in perspective, it's about 10 times more than the consumer would pay. What other utilities do you and your team at Jefferies like based on some of that earnings growth?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the utilities are in a really fine position here. I mean, we're talking about companies that it's not just Nisource, you're going to be talking about companies in the Midwest that have a similar backdrop who are able to structure contracts that are going to be able to keep customer bills under check, right? And frankly, look, it's Nisource, it's Alliant, LNT. They're sitting, again, on the other side of Chicago and that major data center hub in Iowa. We're looking at a pretty sizable acceleration. Pivot further south. Evergy, Kansas City, fully regulated utility. Again, you would have thought these companies would have been pretty humdrum and mundane, yet raising guidance, long-term visibility well into the 2030s, which is underpinned by contracts that ramp up only by the mid-2030s and then keep going from there.
By the way, David Campbell, who runs Evergy, I did a panel with him at the conference, but he was on Power Lunch a couple weeks ago because they made a deal with a nuclear startup backed by a guy named Bill Gates, who you might have heard about is involved with some software, but they're going to get paid a lot of money for that.
You better believe it, right? I mean, the nuclear story isn't even started yet. I mean, honestly, what we're talking about here is capitalizing on natural gas coupled with some degree of renewables, and we're going to see that really build out to a meaningful extent. In fact, if anything, look, the overall narrative that you want to be paying attention to here is abundant natural gas, abundant renewables in the central part of this country are making energy competitive consistently. And this hyperscaler ramp up hasn't really changed that.